you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Soft Focus. If you've been on these calls before, you'll know the format. But just for those who are new, welcome. So this is something we're completing weekly, looking at subjects around coronavirus and bringing on members and non-members of SOFHT as the panel to offer advice, share their thoughts, best practice, etc. And today we're focusing on training. I'll just get my screen to move on. Tell I'm good with technology, can't you? Why is that not doing anything? 1 minute. There you go. So today we have a panel where we have trainers and also those within the industry then applying areas of training. And this is looking at training around social distancing, ongoing coronavirus management. So if we could open up, what I'll do is, so I think I'm going solo a little bit on this one. I'll monitor what's coming through on chat. What it means is I'll need to stop sharing my screen once we get into the panelists. So the panelists are on the screen at the moment for you. Maybe we could start with those on the panel who are in areas of training and give some thought on the areas that they're being asked to focus on by businesses or in the sector they're working with, the types of areas that they're looking at. So I know we have Sylvia, Kate and Dawn. Maybe we just go in the order there and then we can open that to those who are representing on the panel around retail, food service and manufacturing. So we have Peter, Bijan and Jamie there. So Sylvia, maybe I could hand over to you. If you could just give an overview of those areas that you're supporting with training on at the moment and also how you're managing that and what techniques you're using.
Okay, can you hear me okay, Ian?
Yes, thank you.
Right, hello everybody. So we've been busy quite behind the scenes doing a lot of training. Training has changed dramatically over the last sort of 6 weeks, but a lot of our clients have still needed training to ensure that their business is compliant, especially in manufacturing. I have moved, so I run a training company. I do a third of training, a third of consultancy, and a third of auditing for manufacturing and hospitality, catering, food businesses. So we have a training centre which we really can't use anymore because of the social distancing. So we have moved everything over to Zoom. It's been trial and error. But the only problem I find with Zoom, it's how much somebody's in front of a computer all day. If you can imagine like a level 4 food safety and manufacturing course, how long does a student want to sit on a computer from Monday to Friday? So, but it seems to be going well. What we've done with our courses, we haven't been running any open courses. We've been running just in-house courses for our clients, is with like a level 4 or a level 3, we have broken it down. So saying, instead of doing it 5 days in a row, we've been doing, say, a level 4 1 day a week. So they can still fit it around the business. So they're not too much in front of a computer. But also I've had to go on site. In manufacturing as well, where they've needed key training, which can't be done in a classroom, and it also can't be done via Zoom. So since the beginning, following the guidance that just obviously changes with the Food Standard Agency, and I keep up to date with the UK hospitality, what they're doing, is we've been doing a lot of social distancing. So I've been going into sites and training, saying 2 to 3 at a time, instead of 6 to 10 at a time. The only thing is it's the cost for the client to bring a trainer in to be doing double sessions. Moving forward, I'm working with Highfields, which I've been with them for many years. I'm sure some of you new IFILs, and I think they've got a really good system in place where you can do certain compliance courses, especially the food safety, where I would do them through Zoom, and then at the end of the course, so say we did a 3-day course, at the end of the actual course, they would then do the exam with HiFields. And what this means is they would do a remote exam with somebody from HiFields watching them do the exam. They do the exam online, they get the results straight away, and then the certificate is sent via email. So at the moment, I'm hoping to go back to classroom training. I mean, I miss it and I'll enjoy it, but I need to do what's best at the moment. I would say manufacturing is more busier than catering, so there's more money to be spent on training, but I find in catering, where a lot of our revenue comes down, most of our hospitality restaurants are shut down, and with training, some of you will know that is the last thing businesses are going to spend once they try and get themselves up on their feet. But what we're finding is it's not a tick box exercise. I'm sure lots of you have seen online all these new companies offering level 2 food safety and catering. But for me, I think that's a tick box exercise, because those courses don't really teach you about the COVID-19 guidelines. And I think that is going to be, I think if you're a really good trainer, the emphasis is when you teach your level 2 and your level 3 and your level 4 courses is to build in the COVID guidelines as seen fit, as it changes on a weekly or monthly basis, because it's more about the food safety culture now, and it's about changing people's behaviour about the way that they do things safely. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Sylvia. Much appreciated. I'm sure there'll be some questions. Maybe if we can move on to Kate, and just really your thoughts, Kate, maybe a little bit of background of what you're covering at the moment.
Lovely, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to join the panel today. So I work for BSI, British Standards Institution, and I kind of have two roles. I have an internal focused role where I'm responsible for developing the competency of our internal people in terms of the delivery of our commercial, particularly health, safety and wellbeing products, but then also an external facing role where I help develop our commercial training courses. So I thought I'd cover both, because I think they provide some interesting insight, hopefully to people who are on the panel. So in terms of the internal focus, well, we were in a very lucky position actually, because we had just about 18 months ago started the development of a new suite of online e-learning courses in simplistic terms to deliver to our global community. So we are a global organisation. We have, for instance, over 800 health and safety auditors globally, and we need to ensure that we can provide the same training to them consistently wherever they are in the world. And the e-learning was the most efficient solution to that. So we developed an e-learning suite, and actually that's been ready to roll out. So that's a kind of a series of individual modules that people can access, around their operational audit activities, and it's just available on a training platform. It's kind of it's not quite a webinar. It's a combination of webinar. It's on Rise. It's all SCORM compliant, and that's worked really well. But what we took the opportunity to do was just tweak one or two of the training modules to relate to sort of COVID messaging, because we had the opportunity to do that. But what we've done in addition to that is run a number of sessions like this, sort of live webinar Q&A sessions particularly for our auditors and tutors, both to upskill them in terms of what they need to do to manage their own health and safety during this time, but also what they can do when they're dealing with our clients in terms of helping supporting them and upskilling them in understanding what they should be assessing. And we also, luckily, internally, we have a kind of an online community, and and that's a forum where people can share best practice and their own experience, and we've seen a real increase in the take up of that community as people share their own experiences or challenges or best practice. So that's kind of on the internal side. So it's been quite busy, but as I say, we were well planned for this. From an external, so from our commercial training point of view, and we offer a range of training for all the management systems, whether it's health and safety or business continuity, which is one of flavour of the month at the moment, as well of course food management. Again, we were lucky. We had an online platform, a virtual training platform called Connected Learning Live that we'd already established about 2 years ago, and that was being used particularly in the Americas. But what we found was that although we'd rolled it out globally, there wasn't necessarily the take up globally, because there was still that desire to have face-to-face training for all sorts of different commercial and cultural reasons, but of course the COVID-19 situation has meant that we can't deliver that face-to-face training as we would. So our countries and our clients have been looking for that for that online solution, and the virtual classroom has worked really perfectly. So again, I'm really pleased to say we were in a really strong position. I think the other thing that we've done is responded to our clients' needs. So we have developed some more bespoke training, particularly on sort of communicable disease management, which is kind of a combination of upskilling around health and safety management and then looking at the business continuity aspects, because our clients have been asking for those. And our standard courses that we have, whether that's our food safety or health and safety or particularly business continuity, they're the ones that we're seeing the most sort of interest in. We've updated all of those, as the previous person said, to make sure they incorporate the COVID-19 related elements, so that they're much more relevant and meet the needs of our clients at this time. So yeah, we were lucky that we had some solutions ready to go, both internally and externally.
Thank you, Kate. Much appreciated. Maybe then if we could move on to Dawn and then ask the three panelists before we move on to the industry, really around those COVID-19 related areas and a bit more detail on some of the specifics. But maybe just move on to Dawn first. Dawn, over to you. Is Dawn on the call? Maybe Dawn's not on the call.
I'm on the...
Yeah. Dawn, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Over to you.
Sorry, we've had a few gremlins as I'm just about to sell a virtual classroom to everybody. This is really good. So in terms of what we've been doing at NSF, the shape of our business is such that we work across a number of areas. We do a little bit in terms of open courses. We're linked, as Sylvia is, with Highfield, so delivering those accredited courses. And I would sort of emphasise the point that she's made, that we have flexibility to continue to do those and a lot of support with examinations. The focus of our work tends to be with bespoke courses and client-specific training. And clearly, at this point in time, as again's been mentioned, face-to-face training isn't something that anybody wants. But I think the key challenge that we've all had is to ensure that what we could produce is a platform that will deliver a learning experience that reflects what you would get in a classroom. So a very flexible learning solution with breakout rooms and all of these areas. And this is what we've been focusing on in the last few weeks, doing some courses. We're running a BRC auditor training course tomorrow, for example, remotely. So that's going to be quite the challenge, I think, to link different platforms to get examinations and so forth going on. But what we're really doing is reviewing the content of the course and the training requirements. So if we think about, and we're specifically focusing on COVID for a lot of our clients now, so I just really, I think, go into those kind of areas, because what we have is a moving feast in terms of information that's coming through, the way that responses should be challenged. I got the 75-page hospitality recommendations or draft documents to run through. So we're having to hit that moving target. And I think within training, the important thing is reiterating the why and making sure there's absolute clarity within the concept of COVID, the implications. And we're all bombarded with a lot of information, but I think the key is let's make sure we focus our training on why we're doing this. And I think also there's a need to have a kind of schedule that starts off perhaps with people who are still on furlough to get them prepared and ready, start thinking in the right way. To do obviously then some training piece when they return into the business. And then I think refresher training at a fairly regular intervals as people actually experience working under these very different conditions. And of course, we'll still be responding, I'm sure, to things that are coming in from the government, from recommendations on good practice. In terms of modes of delivery, again, we've got to be more flexible. Face-to-face in any environment is going to be difficult. So I think webinar scenarios, on-demand webinars, all of these different modalities are going to be what is key. And just to sum up, so I don't hog too much of the time, I think we've got to be flexible in what we're delivering and accept that the likelihood is that the face of training moving forward is going to change. We've all learned different ways of working. We're all developing better platforms and formats for training. We're trying to make them as close to a face-to-face experience. And in terms of providing, our end users with the most flexible, relevant information, I think those are the formats that we're going to need. That's coming from someone whose passion is delivering face-to-face training with the responsiveness and impact that it brings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. And I've also been supporting with some of the SOFHT courses and transferring some of those online. So I think we're all in a similar situation of how do we sort of develop and adapt the courses. And thank you for the 3 panelists so far. Much appreciated. What I should have said at the beginning, you can tell I don't normally do the introduction, is the housekeeping. So fire escapes left and right, toilets at the back, and we are recording. That's the bit I should have said. We are recording. So apologies, I should have said that at the beginning. Can we then go into a little bit more detail before we move over into the gentleman from the industry? Some of the specific areas of coronavirus that you're talking about. Dawn, I know you started to touch on those. Maybe again go back to Sylvia. Just can you give some specific examples of what you would be talking through in the presentation? Just give people ideas what they should be considering within their own training, and then maybe we can open up for some questions.
So some of my clients, I do a lot of training on site, actually in their kitchens, training chefs. So they really like me to take a level 2 food safety course, which I break down by So in regards to COVID-19, for example, we've been teaching recently how to take delivery scenes. So teaching them that the delivery man shouldn't be coming into the site now, that they should be wearing masks and gloves. As soon as it comes in, it needs to be decanted, put straight away. When they work in the kitchen, it needs to be a one-way system, so there should only be one person in the fridge.
Well, we've got a little bit of noise, I think, come through.
Not me.
It's not you. I think we can still hear you.
Yes.
If I can see who it is, I'll mute them, but I can't. Okay.
How they should work.
One minute. I think Sarah, I think we got quite a lot of background noise from you, from what I can see. I think I can do. There you go. Over to you. Now I don't know how to get them back, but I can definitely mute.
So I mean, the key thing. I mean, in all the years I've been teaching food hygiene, which is over 20 years, the one thing that I'm always battling against is dirty kitchens and the lack of hand washing and the poor cleanliness. And the key thing to most of this is enhancing what people do in the kitchen. It's okay on a course via Zoom or face class, teaching people how to wash their hands, but they've actually got to do it. We need to change people's behaviour, that what they do now, that when they restart their food businesses is really, really important. And you need key people, competent people with the right skills, the knowledge and experience to be able to supervise these people. Some people will need more training, you know, training will be up to date. Food safety systems will need to be looked at as well. So there will be a big need for level 2, level 3 and level 4 food safety training as we go along.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. That's great. Kate or Dawn, any further comments?
Yes, if I may. So I think the thing that I spend a lot of time in terms of the training and making sure that the message is coming across is actually on the virus biology as a starting point. One of the things that we see is the kind of the fear and the myths and the misconception that there are around the virus itself. And one of the things that is so important, and that's where the training can come in, is really being able to make sure that people are very clear on the facts related to the biology, so how it's actually spread, how long it might last on surfaces, because then that re-emphasizes then the needs for the controls, or the controls that need to be in place. You know, we've just touched on, you know, the hand washing, the personal hygiene, but that personal hygiene needs to go a little bit further. So actually I've seen a number of our clients actually touch on personal hygiene in terms of, you know, that discussion with their workers that they need to have a bath or shower every day, as well as the hand cleaning, and they need to wash their hair, you know, actually down to that level. The sneezing, the respiratory etiquette does need to reinforcing. And again, one of the things that's interesting, because we kind of again work globally, and we see this in food anyway, you know, wherever we are in the world, that we tend to get quite a large migrant workforce. So there might actually be other issues, sort of cultural norms like spitting, for instance, that you know, people are having to be trained on to not do. The same in terms of, you know, smoking, and making sure that they dispose appropriately of cigarette butts. So, you know, the training around sort of that personal hygiene goes sort of much wider than maybe the messages we kind of hear from a UK point of view. The other thing that, I mean, you know, there's obviously the training on any changes that are being made in relation to kind of workplace health and safety for the organisation. So the social distancing rules, you know, the one-way systems, how to manage, you know, sort of looking at customer-facing roles, you know, how to manage and deal with customers who don't follow those rules and guidance, what you need to train and what guidance you need to give to customers. So actually, you know, practical things like how many people there should be in the shop at any one time, making sure that the workers know that, and they're empowered to actually deal with that. The other one, it was touched on in terms of previously sort of deliveries. But one of the areas that we've seen sometimes forgotten is then actually how to clean the vehicles that people might be operating in, and particularly if they're shared vehicles, you know, over a shift. So again, thinking particularly kind of online deliveries that have obviously been picked up, you know, of food deliveries in particular, you know, that kind of whole training piece around not only the delivery process to maintain social distancing, but also then the cleaning of the vehicle. So they're kind of, you know, it's quite encompassing, and obviously I think one of the things that, you know, and again it's been touched on, that some of the guidance is changing, so it's about really regular communication, updating it and reassuring, you know, particularly employees, but also making sure that customers are reassured about your processes. Oh, you're on mute, Ian. We're all very good at muting, and then we forget.
I've got the phone going because last time it was very crackly and on the screen something is okay on the screen, but then anyway, there you go. Getting used to technology. Sorry, Dawn.
Yes,
you're back with us. Yeah,
I'm back with you. I think what we've got to bear in mind here, I mean, what we're facing is a huge picture, a huge series of events within our businesses that have got to be addressed. From something as fundamental as just getting some of our teams back into work, right the way through to looking, as Kate has mentioned, through the whole of the process, through what's happening with delivery drivers, you know, with receipts of goods and so on and so forth, and covering that whole big picture. I think within manufacturing, we've sort of progressed a little bit along the journey because sites are open. They've had to address rules and regulations around social distancing. You know, there's a forum from HSE going out and having a look to see if everything's being done as it should be. So they've progressed a little bit down the line and would have need to have addressed in this circumstance where a key element is actually making people feel confident in the workplace. We have to shape training that will give them that level and degree of confidence. So that in terms of training build is a key feature. We need to make sure it will move on as things progress to allow for perhaps the use of more agency staff while people are furloughed within manufacturing. Perhaps it's a better prospect for a business where maybe the call off of product isn't so rapid, that they're using a temporary workforce, and that needs, again, very, very focused training, right from the why should you be doing what you're doing, through the way we do it round here, you know, the elements of what is company specific and a part of the culture. Where we're finding we're focusing a lot of our attention now is looking to the future within hospitality, because there are tremendous challenges in those sectors. Working out exactly to the points, how do you implement social distancing? How do we get the one-way system going? How do we make it really easy within operations so that people can see lots of visuals to show them this is the direction you need to be going in? Shaping training, so it's short, sharp, modules, for example, so people can really get involved and concentrate for the timing. You know, the longer training courses that we're doing or the longer webinars aren't going to work from anyone's point of view. And the challenge, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, is really pulling together all of the information from all of the different sources and keeping it absolutely on the line and relevant. Thinking the huge picture about what happens in a pub, in a restaurant, you know, in a drive-through. All of these things will have different challenges and concepts. And I think people are having to go back to first principles, rewrite procedures, do lots of risk assessments, and training becomes a point of evolution out of all of that.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, and that's probably quite a good lead into, and we're about halfway through, which is also good timing. I'd like to think is maybe we go through to some of that practical application that's currently underway. You've mentioned drive-through, you've mentioned around the restaurants. So Bijan, maybe that's a good segue into yourself within McDonald's. I know you're starting to open up, and some of the practices that are being implemented within food service, and the training around those.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. One of the most important parts of any new action is making sure the right level of education has been put into place and followed by a very good, intense training program to make sure that education message has gone across and people do understand what they're supposed to be doing and why. Why are they actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? And I find that to be the most critical part of any kind of training to make it robust enough to fulfill the aim. And we have been going through that, especially in the UK. The restaurants have been shut completely for quite a number of weeks. Training going on in the background and showing the staff what they need to be doing and what message they need to provide for also the customers to make sure they adhere to those practices too. It's not just about the actual employees, because they have to interact with the customers coming in, and not to get anybody upset, to make sure they understand and have everybody do the basic things of keeping a distance, washing their hands appropriately, but of course having the right tools in place to allow them to do that is another key factor. You know, it's very good to say go wash your hands, but there's no washing basin anywhere to be found. I mean, that doesn't really work, does it? So keep your distance, but stay in the queue right next to somebody else breathing down your neck. That doesn't work either. So there's all these things that need to be practically approached and give the right amount of knowledge, education, training, and that's been going on. And we find that it is actually a refreshing thought because it's put training back on the curriculum, how important it is. And for me, I love that part because it brings you back to a place where you say, I'm now going to focus on all the things we were supposed to do in the first place too. I'm going to re-emphasize all of those and add things on top, which actually makes a lot of sense because, COVID-19 is no different to many things we've seen before. It's just that people are seeing a new name and they panic. And you say, calm down, don't worry, it's a virus. We have ways to deal with viruses. It has different criteria associated with it. We learn, we move along, don't panic, stay calm. Let's look at the science, let's move forward. And as long as you keep that, give that confidence to people, they will calm down, they will trust you more, and they will follow suit, and we'll get over this as fast as we possibly can.
Thank you, Bijan. Thank you. I think we'll do as we did for the first section. Maybe we can sort of move on to Peter sort of with retail, and then Jamie with manufacturing, and then bring the panel back together. So, Peter, from a retail perspective, obviously, have been on the journey, as Dawn mentioned, a bit longer than within food service. One of the points, and I know you've commented this before, is around that sort of customer-facing role, and I think it was mentioned around empowerment of the staff and how they interact. But do you mind just giving an overview of where training is now, ongoing training, as maybe things are settling more within retail?
Yes, by all means. I think we're quite fortunate in that we're operating in what might be called a low-risk mode at the moment. Biggest change in the business at the start of lockdown was removal of high-risk food service operations. So the challenge of more involved and detailed training in relation to open food handling has disappeared for the time being. Clearly that presents some challenges when we consider reopening those operations. But for the time being, the large number of new recruits that we've had to maintain and expand capacity in our normal shop floor and home delivery operation are able to be inducted via online training. And that's obviously at a relatively simple, straightforward level. The biggest additional training piece has been around the COVID-specific precautions and social distancing. And I would say that generally colleagues get it, mainly because they feel vulnerable. It's not this issue of, if I contaminate the product, I won't know whether I ever give someone food poisoning. They are the ones front line. This training was delivered around a framework. I think I may have referred to it before. It now amounts to around 70 odd pages of how stores should implement social distancing, which was delivered via the management teams at each site. And I think it's worth picking up. One of the other speakers mentioned the need to guide people how to do this, is that when you have a multi-site business, the solution may vary considerably between them. So will 2 metre floor marking suffice, or is a mandatory one-way system going to be absolutely crucial? Where are your pinch points going to be, because this particular premises has an unusual layout? So the guidance tried to encompass all of those options, and then managers were able to implement and deliver as they saw fit. Following on from implementation, excuse me, the main focus of all of our store audits at the moment by the audit team, the group safety team, of which I'm part, and senior retail management, is focused on implementation of social distancing rules. Compliance generally good, but again, you pick up the odd thing, like the colleague who rushes forward extending their hand to the regional manager to greet them, colleagues who greet each other by patting themselves on the back. Very hard to break those habits, but obviously as and when it's detected, there's a bit of coaching to try and bring them back into the right place. The other thing that was being touched on, and I've mentioned previously, was this frontline customer facing role and perhaps the additional risk of conflict. All businesses have some unpleasant customers from time to time, but at the moment people are quite stressed, and for that reason some forget, or some just simply choose to not follow the rules. And a big part of our training was around conflict management, conflict resolution, particularly involving the correct selection of colleagues. I think we initially referred to them as marshals, and then rapidly realised that was a rather authoritarian term, but meeters and greeters who were engaging with customers to explain the reason for social distancing, to explain that they may be waiting 30 minutes or they may be waiting 60 minutes, and also what we reasonably expected of them when they were on premises. I think I have to say overall, considering the number of customers visiting stores, it's been largely successful, but I think all businesses should be aware that there is a much heightened likelihood of conflict between customers and colleagues, and need to take steps to address that. The other thing that's worth noting, discussion about online training and internal training, external providers. We have been looking at some statutory training requirements and time-bound training requirements, particularly around things like first aid, traditionally delivered through classroom sessions, hands-on sessions, which is simply not doable at the moment. And the other problem is that normal levels of cover in premises by first aiders or people trained in emergency first aid at work may be impacted through higher levels of absence, whether that relates to COVID or not. And we have done a risk assessment exercise and created some standby training measures, basically creating so-called appointed persons who will have an appropriate level of very basic first aid training who can cover those gaps. But I think it's worth looking at, say, time-bound training which expires, to check what's happening when people are absent or have been absent because the business has been closed for the past 2 or 3 months. There may be some hidden horrors that, come out and shock you if you're not careful. That's where we are. It is social distancing piece, which is the main business as usual training, seems to be taken on board by his colleagues. To pick up on something someone else said, I think it's about having this clear and single point of information and accurate information. The problem is that all of your colleagues will be reading newspapers, listening to the news and using social media as much as listening to what management teams tell them, and there is scope for a lot of conflict there. So we have a dedicated intranet site specifically in relation to COVID, and a daily updated set of frequently asked questions, hopefully addressing colleague concerns and also giving them accurate information. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, very, very interesting. I'm not on mute, that's okay. Thank you. So maybe we can then move to Jamie around manufacturing. So Jamie, again, sort of how you're covering training related to these areas, but maybe also, have you had to revisit any of the training as you've started to sort of review how it's actually working within the manufacturing environment as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've been, very fortunate that we've been able to continue to be in operation for the whole period, albeit at certain times we have reduced numbers of employees on site, but we've been very fortunate with that. So for us, from a training point of view, as you say, it has been a case that we've been updating and constantly changing
what we're training out in line with, you know, updates with guidance and that type of thing. I think for us, it's making sure that in certain circumstances, you know, we are making sure that the training is available for all staff. And I think that's one of the key aspects. I think someone else mentioned earlier on about agency staff. I think that's really important as well, because it can be quite difficult, really, typically when you get a large number of agency staff. How do you deal with training those on a face-to-face basis, making sure that, you know, you're not breaching any particular social distancing rules? So that was something that we've had to look at very carefully. You know, the usual situations where we can deal with those via Zoom and Teams and that type of thing, but it's trying to make sure that you know, those people that are being trained have access to, you know, the appropriate IT equipment, for example. And that's something you can't really underestimate. And I think it's probably going to be more of an issue for the hospitality area, where if, you know, you're looking for large numbers of people that need to be trained, do they actually have access to the appropriate IT equipment to be able to undertake that training? I think what we've started to look at more recently over the last couple of weeks is other areas. So, you know, in line with updated government guidance, is situations such as you know, frequent hand touch points, making sure that they're being cleaned, and who is cleaning them and has undertaken, you know, some appropriate training to make sure they're doing it correctly. And, you know, usual things like door handles, handrails, but then also thinking about other commonly used items like cleaning equipment, might be you know, forklift trucks, pallet trucks, making sure that all of the teams are aware of what they'd need to do from a cleaning point of view. I think then looking at other areas, we've tried to look at it from a wider point of view as well, with changes to guidance, with certain, you know, the slight relaxation on people returning to work. So, as I expect a number of businesses have, you know, a lot of typical office staff would have been working at home, but there's potential for them to actually be coming back into offices. So it's making sure that you know, the appropriate guidance and training is available for those people. But it's then also making sure that there's the appropriate training for people like HR staff to deal with any concerns about people that are returning to work, because there will be some people out there that will have concerns, won't necessarily want to return to work. So it's making sure, I think, that, you know, there's other departments within businesses have the appropriate training so they know how to deal with those people correctly. So it's those types of things that we've been looking at, really. And then lastly, the other training that we've been doing over the whole period, really, is really looking at those people that are working at home and making sure that, you know, they've got the appropriate training in relation to basic display screen equipment. So if they're working at home for constant, you know, long periods, making sure that they're actually not going to then do themselves harm in terms of sitting at office desks for hours and hours and not moving around. And then associated with that, you know, is in relation to things like dealing with people with mental health and well-being, and making sure that those people, you know, there's adequate information and communications going around those types of subjects. So for us, as I say, we've been quite lucky, but that has had its challenges. We're constantly looking and updating how we're actually looking after our staff. And as I say, I think my biggest questions to some of the other panel really is you know, how do you deal with people that don't actually have access to IT equipment? Because one of the key ways people do get trained will be via Teams and Zoom.
So I mean, do you want me to kind of dive straight in as an answer to that? I mean, certainly it's one of the challenges you know we have faced internally and certainly sort of externally with some of our clients and organizations. I mean, one of the, I mentioned our online community that we have for sort of, which is more of an internal resource. It's app-based, so it's phone-based, as well as accessible via laptop. And I think, although, you know, again, you can't assume that everybody has a smartphone, you know, actually there's pretty good coverage of that now. And within that platform then is all the training material, so they can access it via their phone. And we're actually looking at a similar solution. We're just in the process of developing now a very short phone-based app for really basic training on sort of personal hygiene, the use of PPE and social distancing. Very much, you know, sort of 30 seconds, 60-second, very visual, aimed at, you know, those people who don't have access to more complex IT equipment, and also don't have the time or necessarily the language to understand more complex training. So I think that, you know, within the context of this, there's absolutely part of that. I think the other thing, and I was going to reflect to it, so I'll do it now and then I'll shut up. And Jamie just mentioned it. The other thing that we've been doing a huge amount more on is mental health training for our internal people. So we have some really good online resources. So we've been promoting those much more, making sure they're much more visible. We've been doing more regular sort of online training sessions. And one of the things that I'm just about to do for our people is actually just do a kind of a webinar session more like this, but I'm going to encourage them to invite their friends and family, because one of the things with mental ill health is understanding the signs and symptoms, and sometimes we don't see it in each other or in ourselves. So if we train other people, then they may pick up and help. And also I think it's, you know, that's a really good way of sort of supporting, you know, our wider community of the BSI family. So I did just want to reflect on that, and Jamie jogged my memory on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Any other comments from the panel?
Well, I'd be agreeing with Kate that you know that the smartphone is probably the solution, but it's also the challenge, because we need to redevelop the materials to fit that forum. You know, we can't be sharing the same PowerPoint presentations, the same screens. We need to use more gamesmanship. Probably, I think that's going to be a format that works really well with that modality. So I think we're going to have to be thinking flexibly that our courses may not just be a one-stop shop, that we may have to be thinking about how things work best, giving the same information through a variety of different mediums.
The question I have, sorry, Jamie, just in terms of obviously face-to-face training has always been the preferred option, and I think it going forward, you know, it will be still very important. When do you think we'll be in a situation where face-to-face training will be offered again?
Jamie, that currently is sort of going on at the moment in the hospitality industry. If you think a chef, when a new chef starts in the kitchen, as an example, or even an operator in manufacturing, the way that they're usually trained is like on the job. You know, they have a buddy or they have a supervisor, and that is still happening behind the scenes, but it's having to done very carefully with the social distance guidelines. But they need to know how to operate, you know, a food slicer. You can't do that through a platform. They need to know how to use the vacuum pack machine. So there's different techniques that need to be done, but face-to-face is still happening, but it's just on a one-to-one, and there's only 2 people in the kitchen at that time.
I think, Jamie, in terms of group training opportunities, we're a long way away, I think, from delivering, and I wouldn't necessarily put a date on it. If I think about the context of my business, we're putting together our own internal programme for how we return to the office. You know, it's unlikely that we will be having meetings in a conference room for the foreseeable future. Therefore, the training room isn't going to be something which we open up. In terms of hotels and on all of those rooms that we used to sort of buy into, and the training centres, similarly, they've got to be ready and prepared. In terms of client premises, I think the bulk of our clients are going to continue to minimise occasions when social distancing isn't very readily and easily managed and don't have the resources, which is why I think it's so important that we're looking at platforms that get as close as we can to the, you know, the face-to-face experience in learning, so that if you are bringing together groups of people for that perhaps more intensive training, that you have got breakout rooms, that you have got polls, that you can use videos, that you can really get some interaction going and have the questions and answers. And that's really where I've been focusing a lot of my time recently with courses. As Ian mentioned, we've done a little bit of work with SOFHT to put courses together just to try and get the right platform that works. I think we're a long way from face-to-face in groups, but agreeing that the one-to-one sitting by Bertha type training is going to have to go on to transition the skills that people need.
Yeah, it just depends on the sector and the job that is needed at the time, and it just needs to be looked after.
I think that this is where it becomes important if businesses are starting up again, to recognise that fact that in certain circumstances that training will be required, so that you're going to need to then make sure you've got the appropriate PPE in place for that training. And I think it can't be underestimated in terms of certain PPE. You know, people need to be making sure they've got that, or got it now, or ordering it very soon, because if businesses are starting to open up in the very near future, you know, there are some lead times on certain PPE. And that goes alongside not just PPE, but then also other social distancing guidelines. So if you're talking about floor stickers and signage and that type of thing, you know, that people need to be aware of lead times of that type of material.
If I just add, I think it's worth adding that regardless of the size of your, or potential size of your training room and the ability to social distance within the room, you have to consider that bringing a number of people on site purely for training is going to impact social distancing in cloakrooms, catering facilities that you may have on site, which in turn impacts the main operation of the premises. So it's thinking a bit literally outside the training room and thinking, you know, corridors. If you can accommodate 15 socially distanced people and a trainer in a training room, that's fine, but there may only be one door accessing it and a narrow corridor accessing it, which needs to be shared with other operators. And it's definitely a question of taking in the bigger picture.
Thank you, Peter. I'm just mindful of time. We probably need, well, I think, one last question before we start to wrap up. There was a question that came through, I think, Alison, on chat. I think we've covered Diane's relating to marshalling staff, but Alison has asked, where traditional training has been face-to-face, and there's been a swift adaptation to online, virtual, such as HACCP Level 4 mentioned earlier. Does the panel think the virtual mode will remain post-COVID? I believe that's the last question. Any thoughts from anybody?
I think I touched earlier on the point that I feel the shape of training going forward is going to change. I think the shape of our workplace, the way that we're all working, you know, people have got used to home working. We're challenging, do people need to go into an office, or can they work effectively and efficiently from home? What do we need to do to make that happen effectively? In terms of training, you know, there are some cost benefits, I guess, to clients if they're not sort of sending people off to do a 4-day residential high-level food safety course or whatever. And I think we'll need to think far more about what is the best way of offering it from the point of view of the learner, who, I mean, that's what it's all got to be about. Can we provide the right learning experience so people are getting what they need? Can we make sure it's consolidated? Can we make sure it's something they're going to go off and do? But I can see the future of training being quite a different shape than the face-to-face and e-learning that we have currently. I think it will grow.
Thank you, Dawn. We probably need to wrap up. We've got 5 minutes till the top of the hour. Just one question. We're looking to take a break next week with bank holiday, and then sort of reschedule the week after, or reconvene, sorry. Are there any areas that we should discuss during that time? Things could change in a couple of weeks, but any thoughts? Otherwise, we'll have a think. that's open to anybody. Well, if anybody does, maybe just sort of drop it through on chat, or drop a message to the SOFHT office, and then we can reconvene.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Hi, I'm new into the panel, so, and it was kind of a last minute, so I don't know kind of what you've covered before, but I know one of the conversations I've been having quite a few times now internally and with clients is the kind of the use of PPE and other social distancing measures like sneeze screens, and the additional or the potential increased risk there is in terms of food safety, because they can introduce you've got additional surfaces to clean. I'm sure everybody on listening to this call will know the challenges of, if people are wearing gloves, they don't generally wash their hands. That's one of the reasons it's often discouraged within from a food safety point of view. So I don't know whether that's a subject that's been covered previously, but it might be something that people are interested in, particularly as we are seeing a need for the public in the widest sense for reassurance and the use of face coverings, although they're not PPE, and organisations need to start thinking about how they're going to manage that face covering aspect, even if it's not a specified PPE adaptation within the workplace.
Yep, thank you. We've touched on some, but things change, things move on. We get more experience as we learn from them. So to revisit some of those areas and develop them. Yeah, agreed. Okay, no, thank you. Any other comments from anybody? Well, I can see one coming through from chat. I'm just mindful of the time. If there is, as I said, maybe put it on chat or send it through to the SOFHT office. Said we're looking at a break next week, but and then communicate for the week after. Thank you very much to the panelists. Fiona, are you on the call? I know you had some technical problems. If you want to close.
Hi Ian. I'm here.
Hello.
Sorry, I had the perfect storm of a misbehaving laptop and a neighbour doing building work. So hopefully on your training courses online that doesn't happen to you. But I just want to say thanks to Ian for chairing the whole session today, and to everybody on the panel. I thought it was really interesting, and I look forward to more conversations around social distancing, PPE, etc. in future calls. I think we're all learning every week. We think we understand it, and then a week comes along and we've got more questions. So these continue to be really helpful sessions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.